The shuttle docked with a soft hiss and stepped onto Nexus Station for the first time. She carried only a small bag over her shoulder. Her boots made quiet sounds on the metal floor. All around her, aliens of every shape and size moved through the wide hallways. Some walked on two legs like her. Others crawled on many legs. A few floated in special tanks filled with liquid. Was not tall, she was not strong-looking. She had brown skin, dark hair tied back in a simple knot, and calm brown eyes that watched everything. She was humanity's first long-term ambassador to the Galactic Concordat, the great alliance of species that ruled this part of the galaxy. Humans had only made contact with alien life 5 years ago. They were the species in the Concordat, the youngest, the most unknown. A tall figure stepped forward to meet her, had to look up and then up some more. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall. Her body was covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. Her eyes were large and golden, with vertical pupils like a cat. When she smiled, she showed rows of teeth that were clearly made for tearing meat. This was Counselor Al of the. Her species had ruled the Concordat for 10,000 years. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, the top of the food chain. Every other species either feared them, served them, or both. Al looked down at the way someone might look at a small insect that had wandered into their home. So Al said, her voice smooth and cold, "This is the human." Ambassador said. She kept her voice calm and polite. "Thank you for meeting me, Counselor." Al made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I was assigned to orient you, to help you understand how things work here." She began walking and had to move quickly to keep up with her long steps. "I must admit, when we received humanity's application to join the Concordat, many of us were surprised. Surprised. Your species is so new to space travel, so limited in your territory, and physically." Al paused and looked down at again. Her golden eyes moved over the human's small body, her soft skin, her lack of claws or fangs or any visible weapons. "Physically, you are not impressive." Said nothing, she just kept walking. They passed through a large open area where hundreds of aliens gathered. Some were conducting business. Others were eating at food stalls. A group of hunters stood near a fountain, talking loudly and showing off their claws to each other. They were all tall and powerful, built like predators, moving with the easy confidence of creatures who had never known fear. "Tonight there is a reception," Al said. "All the ambassadors will attend. You will be introduced to the council. I suggest you stay quiet and observe. Learn your place." "My place?" asked. Al stopped walking. She turned to face fully, and the scales along her neck began to glow with soft blue light. Had read about this in her briefing files. It was a threat display, a warning. Among the it meant, "I am dangerous. Do not challenge me." "Your place," Al repeated slowly, "is at the bottom. Every new species starts there. Some rise over time if they prove useful, most do not. Humans," she shook her head slightly. "Humans evolved on a temperate world with one small sun. Your planet is practically a nursery. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Your ancestors survived by hiding in caves and scavenging what real predators left behind." Listen to all of this. Her expression did not change. "Do you have nothing to say?" Al asked. She seemed almost annoyed that was not reacting. "I'm listening," said simply. "You said I should learn." Al stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and continued walking. "Your quarters are in Section 7. It is not the best section, but it is appropriate for a species of your standing." That evening the reception was held in a grand hall with walls of living crystal that sang softly when touched. Hundreds of aliens filled the space, stood near the edge of the room, watching. She wore simple formal clothes, black and gray, nothing fancy. Among the colorful scales and feathers and shells of the other species, she looked plain, forgettable. Al found her there. The counselor had brought friends, other high-ranking members of her species. They formed a half-circle around, looking down at her with amused expressions. "This is the human I told you about," Al announced, loud enough for nearby aliens to hear. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Ambassador, the representative of the most delicate species in the Concordat. One of the other, a male with scales that showed he was a veteran hunter, leaned closer too. He sniffed the air near her. "She smells like prey," he said, and the group laughed. "Tell me, human," Al said, still smiling her predator smile. "What did your species do on your before you stumbled into space?" Looked up at her. "Many things. We built cities, created art, developed technology." "Yes, yes," Al waved a clawed hand dismissively. "But what was your role in your world's ecosystem? Every species has one. There were hunters, the apex, the top of our food chain for millions of years. The over there," she pointed at a group of small, nervous-looking aliens with many eyes. "They were burrowers, prey animals. They evolved to hide and run." She looked back at, "What were humans?" Was quiet for a moment. The whole room seemed to be listening now. "We were many things," she finally said. "We adapted." Al laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "Adapted. A polite way of saying you had no natural advantages, that you survived only because nothing bothered to hunt you seriously." She extended one hand, letting her claws slide out slowly. They were black and sharp as knives. "Your kind evolved to run, human, to hide, to scavenge what predators left behind. Here in the Concordat, you will find that some things never change." She retracted her claws and turned away, dismissing completely. The other aliens in the room watched. Some looked amused. Some looked pitiful, feeling sorry for the small human. A few of the prey species, the others who had lived under dominance for generations, watched with expressions that were harder to read. Stood alone in the crowd. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look angry. She simply watched Al walk away, and she smiled a small, quiet smile. She could wait. Humans were good at waiting. The weeks that followed were not easy for Counselor Al made sure of that. Quarters in Section 7 were small and uncomfortable. The lighting was set for eyes, which meant it was too dim for humans. The temperature was too cold. The bed was shaped wrong for her body. When she requested adjustments, her requests were lost in the system. When she filed complaints, nobody responded. The schedule was worse. Al arranged meetings at hours that made no sense for human biology, would be called to important discussions at what felt like 3 in the morning, when her body wanted only to sleep. She would arrive tired and struggling to focus, while the counselors watched her with knowing smiles. Documents that needed were not translated. Announcements that affected humanity's interests were made without informing her. Invitations to important events arrived after the events had already happened. It was all very clever. Nothing was openly hostile. Nothing could be pointed to as a clear violation of Concordat rules. It was simply 1,000 small cruelties, 1,000 tiny cuts, designed to make feel unwelcome, to remind her of her place. Other species had experienced this before. They had been doing it for thousands of years. New species would arrive in the Concordat full of hope and pride. They would slowly crush that hope. Most species eventually accepted their lower position. They became quiet, obedient. They learned not to challenge the apex predators who ran everything. Did not complain. She adjusted her sleep schedule as best she could. She learned to read the untranslated documents using her own computer systems. She arrived at every meeting on time, no matter how tired she was. Her expression remained calm, polite, patient. This seemed to annoy Al more than anything else. But while they ignored or mocked her, other species began to notice her. It started with There were small beings about 4 feet tall, with rounded bodies covered in soft gray fur. They had 6 limbs and many small eyes that blinked in complex patterns. They had evolved as prey animals on a dangerous world, spending most of their history hiding in underground tunnels from the predators above. When they had found them long ago, they had been easily conquered. Now they served as workers, engineers, and servants throughout the Concordat. Most species ignored the certainly did, but had noticed them watching her from the edges of rooms. She had seen their many eyes tracking her movements with something that looked like curiosity. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of ignored messages and missed meetings, was walking through a quiet section of the station when I stepped out of a doorway in front of her. He was old. His gray fur had turned white around his face, and his movements were slow and careful, but his many eyes were bright and intelligent. "Ambassador," he said, his voice was soft and whispery, "may I walk with you?" "Of course," said. They walked together through the empty hallway. The old was quiet for a while, seeming to think about what he wanted to say. "I am elder," he finally said. "I serve on the engineering council, not an important position, but it gives me access to information." Waited. When a new species joins the Concordat, their records are submitted to the archives, continued. Their history, their biology, their evolutionary background. Most species submit these records and nobody reads them. The certainly do not. They already know everything they need to know. His many eyes blinked in a pattern that might have been humor, or so they believe. "You read our records," said. It was not a question. I did. Stopped walking. They were in a small observation area now with windows that looked out at the stars. "I found them. Interesting. They looked at your physical form and saw weakness. No claws, no fangs, no armor or venom. They saw a prey species and dismissed you." "And what did you see?" His eyes blinked again, faster this time, a sign of strong emotion. "I saw something that frightened me." "Said nothing." "There was a hunting method described in your records," said slowly. "Something your ancestors did long ago on your persistence hunting, it was called." Nodded. "Your ancestors would find an animal, something larger than them, faster than them, stronger than them. An animal that could outrun them easily in a short chase." Paused. "But humans did not chase for short distances. They followed, they walked, they jogged, hour after hour, day after day if necessary. The animal would run away and your ancestors would follow. The animal would hide and your ancestors would find it. The animal would run again and your ancestors would follow again." The old's voice had grown very quiet. "Your ancestors never stopped," he said, "never gave up. They followed the animal until it could not run anymore, until its heart gave out, until it collapsed from exhaustion, and then your ancestors would walk up to it calmly and kill it." The stars shone cold and distant through the window. "The hunt with speed and power," said. "They attack quickly and overwhelm their prey. It is over in moments, but humans," he shook his head slowly, "humans hunt with time, with patience, with endurance that no other species on your world could match. You did not need to be the fastest or the strongest. You simply needed to never ever stop." Looked at him steadily. "That was a long time ago. We don't hunt like that anymore." "No," agreed, "but the ability is still in you. The endurance, the patience, the refusal to give up." His eyes met hers and for the first time saw something surprising in them. "Hope. I have served the for 60 years. I have watched them break 100 species. They mock you because they think you are prey, because you look soft and weak, because you do not fight back when they push you." He moved closer to her. "But I have been watching you, Ambassador. I have seen how you adjust, how you adapt, how you absorb every insult, every obstacle, every cruelty and keep going. You do not break, you do not stop." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I do not think you know how rare that is, or how frightening." Was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. Looked out at the stars. "Because I am old and I am tired of being afraid. Because I have spent my whole life watching predators rule through fear and strength. And because, for the first time in 60 years, I have seen something that makes me wonder if things might change." He turned and began to walk away. "Word is spreading, Ambassador," he said over his shoulder. "Among the prey species, among the workers and the servants and the forgotten ones, we are reading your archives now. We are learning what you really are. He paused at the doorway. To think they are the apex predators of this galaxy. They have never imagined that a true predator might look like prey, that the most dangerous hunter is not the one who runs the fastest, but the one who never stops following. And then he was gone. Stood alone in the observation room looking out at the stars. Somewhere on this station, Al was probably planning her next petty cruelty, her next small humiliation, her next reminder of humanity's place. Smiled. Let her plan, let her scheme, let her believe she was in control. Humans were good at waiting, and had learned patience from the best teachers evolution could provide. Somewhere in the distance, she could almost feel it, the slow shift of understanding beginning to spread through the station, the prey species whispering to each other, sharing what they had learned. The hunt had begun, and they did not even know they were being followed. The crisis came without warning on a cold morning in the station's artificial cycle. Was in her quarters reviewing trade documents when the emergency alert sounded. A hunting ship had returned to the station. This was not unusual. The love to hunt. They traveled to primitive worlds, tracked dangerous creatures, and brought back trophies to display. The Concordat allowed this as long as the hunted species were not intelligent. But this time, something had gone wrong. Arrived at the main docking bay to find a crowd already gathered. Aliens of a dozen species stood in groups, whispering to each other. Guards had formed a barrier, keeping everyone back, and in the center of the bay, surrounded by laughing hunters, was a cage. Inside the cage was a child. Pushed through the crowd until she could see clearly. The child was a species she had read about in her files, were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They were gentle beings, artists and philosophers who had been petitioning the Concordat for protected status for decades. They had blocked their petition each time. This child could not have been more than 6 or 7 years old in human terms. It sat huddled in the corner of the cage, trembling with fear. Its dark eyes were wide and wet with tears. The leader of the hunting party stood beside the cage, receiving congratulations from his friends. He was tall even for a, with pale scales marked by old scars. His name was in, and recognized him from the briefing files. He was Al's younger brother, one of the most famous hunters in the Concordat. Founded on a border world, and was saying loudly, "Wandering alone, no parents in sight, by our law abandoned young are legitimate trophies." A diplomat pushed forward. Had met her once before, ambassador, an elderly female who had spent her entire career trying to protect her species from predation. That child was not abandoned, said. Her voice shook with emotion. Our colony on that world was attacked by raiders 3 days ago. Many parents were killed. The children scattered into the wilderness. We have been searching for survivors. And shrugged. Not my concern, I found it alone. By Concordat law, by tradition, it is mine. It is a child, said, an intelligent being, a person. It is prey, and replied. His hunting party laughed. And I am a hunter. This is the natural order. This is how things have always been. Turned to the council representatives who had gathered nearby. I beg the council to intervene, to show mercy. This is not hunting, this is kidnapping a child. The council representatives looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. None of them challenged the. Al stepped forward from the crowd. Her scales shimmered with satisfaction as she looked at the scene. The law is clear, she said smoothly. My brother's claim is legitimate. They have no standing to contest it. She smiled at. Perhaps if your species were stronger, you would not lose so many children. The ambassador lowered her head. She was crying now, silently. The child in the cage had begun to make small sounds of distress, reaching through the bars toward. Watched all of this. She felt something cold and hard forming in her chest, something that had been sleeping for a long time. She stepped forward. The crowd went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the small human walking toward the cage. Al's eyes narrowed. "Ambassador," Al said, "this does not concern humanity. Step back." Ignored her. She walked until she stood directly in front of N. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He was more than twice her height. His claws were longer than her fingers. His teeth could tear through metal. He looked down at her with amused curiosity, the way someone might look at a small animal that had wandered too close. "I invoke the right of claim," said. Her voice was calm and clear. The entire docking bay went silent. An's amusement faded, his eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "The right of claim," repeated. "Hunting law. Any member of the Concordat may challenge the legitimacy of a hunt through single combat or contest. The challenger risks their own freedom if they lose, but if they win, the trophy is released." She paused. "I have read your laws carefully, and I know my rights." For a moment nobody moved. Then An began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the bay. "You," he shook his head in disbelief. "You are challenging me, a human, a soft, clawless, fangless human." "I am." Al pushed forward, her scales flashing with anger. "This is absurd. Humans have no standing to invoke traditions. You are not hunters. You are barely even." "The right of claim applies to all Concordat members," interrupted. "That is the law. Humanity is a member. I am humanity's representative. I am invoking the right." And studied her with new interest. Around them, the crowd murmured. This had never happened before. No prey species had ever challenged a hunter directly. "Do you understand what you are doing, human?" An asked. "If I accept your challenge and you lose, you become my property, a trophy like the child. I could keep you in a cage for the rest of your life." "I understand," said. "And you still wish to challenge me?" "I do." And smiled slowly. It was not a pleasant smile. "Very well. By tradition, the challenged party chooses the form of the contest. You could ask for combat, but I would simply tear you apart. You could ask for a test of intellect, but that would bore me." He thought for a moment. Then his smile widened. "I choose the chase." His hunting party laughed again. Some of them stamped their feet in approval. "The chase?" asked. "A test of endurance," and explained. "We both run until one of us cannot continue. First to collapse loses. It is an ancient tradition among my people. No has ever lost a chase. We are built for speed, for power, for explosive movement." He looked down at small body. "You will last perhaps an hour, maybe two if you are stubborn. And then you will fall and I will have two trophies instead of one." The crowd began to talk excitedly. This would be entertainment. A human trying to outrun a... It was so absurd it was almost funny. Looked at the cage. The child was watching her with those large, dark, hopeful eyes, had stopped crying. She was staring at with an expression that mixed fear and something else, something like wonder. Elder was somewhere in the crowd, could feel his many eyes on her. She turned back to An. "I accept your terms," she said. "When do we begin?" And scales flickered with pleasure. "Tomorrow, in the whole station will watch." He leaned down until his face was close to hers. His breath was hot and smelled of meat. "I hope you run well, little human. I want this to last long enough to be interesting." Did not step back, she did not flinch. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. That night, alone in her quarters, did not sleep. She sat by her window and looked out at the stars and thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The years of training, the sacrifices, the long journey to this station. Her grandmother had been a marathon runner. Her grandfather had served in wars that required walking hundreds of miles through jungles and deserts. Her ancestors had crossed continents on foot, had survived ice ages and droughts, had kept going when every other species on Earth would have given up. Tomorrow she would run. And she would not stop until they understood exactly what humanity was made of. There was the largest space on Nexus Station. It stretched for miles, a massive artificial wilderness created for recreational hunts. There were forests and meadows, hills and streams, all under a ceiling that mimicked an open sky. The temperature was warm. The air smelled of plants and earth. Thousands of aliens had gathered to watch. They crowded the observation platforms that ringed the dome. Screens throughout the station carried the broadcast. This was the biggest event in years, a human challenging a champion to a chase. Everyone knew how it would end, but they wanted to see it anyway. Stood at the starting point, stretching her legs. She wore simple running clothes, shorts, a light shirt, flexible shoes. A small pack on her back held water and basic supplies. Her dark hair was tied back tightly. Beside her, and stretched as well, though his movements were more like a predator preparing to pounce. His scales gleamed under the artificial sunlight. His hunting party stood nearby, calling out encouragement and jokes. "Remember, little human," and said, "you can surrender at any time. Simply stop running and admit defeat. I will be merciful. I will only keep you for a few years before I grow bored." Said nothing. She checked the laces on her shoes. She took a sip of water. Al stood on the nearest observation platform, watching with cold satisfaction. Ambassador stood far away, holding the young child's hand. They had released the child temporarily to watch the contest. His face was pale with fear. Elder was somewhere in the crowd. Could not see him, but she knew he was watching. A horn sounded. The chase began. And exploded forward like a missile. His powerful legs drove him across the meadow at incredible speed. Within seconds, he had covered 100 meters. He moved like liquid lightning, his body built for exactly this kind of explosive power. Began to jog. The crowd made sounds of amusement. Some of them laughed outright. The contrast was absurd, and was already disappearing into the distance while the human moved at a pace that seemed almost lazy. For the first hour it was barely a contest, and ran circles around the dome. He passed again and again, each time making mocking comments. His hunting party cheered every time he lapped her. He was barely breathing hard. His stamina was excellent for a maintained her steady pace. She did not speed up when he passed. She did not slow down. She just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, her breathing controlled and even. "Is this the best humanity can offer?" and called out as he passed her for the 5th time. "I expected more of a challenge." Did not respond. She took a sip of water from her pack. She kept jogging. By the second hour, some of the laughter in the crowd had faded, and was still running, still fast, but he was no longer doing victory laps. He was moving in a more direct line now, conserving energy. His breathing was heavier than before. Maintained her steady pace. By the 3rd hour and had stopped making jokes. He was walking between his runs now, his powerful legs needing rest. His scales had lost some of their shine. Sweat, or whatever the equivalent was, had begun to appear on his skin. Maintained her steady pace. The crowd had grown quieter. Something was wrong. This was not how chases were supposed to go. The prey was supposed to tire first. The prey was supposed to slow down, stumble, fall. The predator was supposed to triumph. But the human was not slowing down. By the 4th hour and was struggling. His explosive muscles, designed for short bursts of incredible power, were not built for this kind of extended effort. His body could not cool itself efficiently. His joints were beginning to ache. He had never run this long in his life. No had. There had never been any need. Maintained her steady pace. She passed him for the first time as he rested against a tree, gasping for breath. She did not mock him. She did not even look at him. She just kept moving, her legs carrying her forward in that same steady rhythm. And pushed himself back into motion. He refused to let a human beat him. He was a champion, a predator, an apex. He would not lose to prey. He ran and ran and ran. And the human was always there, never rushing, never straining, just following, always following. By the 5th hour and could barely run at all. He was walking now, sometimes stumbling. His scales were dull. His breathing was ragged. Pain showed in every line of his body. came up beside him. She was sweating. Her breathing was harder than before, but she was moving. "You can surrender," she said quietly. "There's no shame in it." And snarled at her and tried to run again. He made it perhaps 50 meters before his legs gave out and he fell. He got up, he tried again. By the 6th hour, the crowd had fallen completely silent. The screens throughout the station showed the impossible image, a champion crawling through the grass while a human jogged steadily behind him. The greatest predator in the galaxy, brought low by a creature half his size who simply would not stop. Al's scales had gone gray with shock. Her claws were extended, digging into the railing of the observation platform. Her eyes were fixed on her brother with an expression of growing horror. The prey species in the crowd had begun to whisper among themselves. The dozens of other species who had lived under dominance for so long. They watched the human woman jogging through and they saw something that had never existed in their world before. Hoping. By the 7th hour and could no longer stand. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, his proud scales scraping against the ground. His body was failing. His heart was pounding too fast. His muscles were screaming for rest that would not come. And still behind him came the soft sound of footsteps, steady, patient, unending. This was the nightmare that evolution had programmed into every prey species on Earth. This was the fear that lived in the bones of animals who had been hunted by humans for 2 million years. Not the fear of claws or fangs, not the fear of speed or strength. The fear of something that never, ever stopped coming. By the 8th hour, and collapsed and did not get up. He lay in the grass, his chest heaving, his eyes unfocused. His body had simply given out. His heart could take no more. His muscles had nothing left to give. Stopped beside him. She was tired, her legs ached. Sweat soaked her clothes, but she was standing. She knelt down next to the fallen hunter. In her pack, she still had water. She took out the container and held it to his lips. "Drink," she said softly, slowly, small sips. He stared at her with confused, exhausted eyes. "Why?" he managed to whisper. "Because you need it," she said simply. She stayed with him until the medical team arrived. She made sure he was breathing properly. She kept him calm when he began to shake from the stress his body had endured. Al watched from the platform above. Her scales had cycled through every color: anger, fear, confusion, shame. She did not understand what she was seeing. She could not process it. The human had won. The human had defeated the greatest hunter in the Concordat. And now, instead of gloating, instead of celebrating, the human was caring for her fallen opponent. What kind of species did that? What kind of predator showed mercy to the defeated? The crowd began to stir. The prey species moved first, pushing forward toward the observation windows. They were crying, not with fear this time, but with something else. They were blinking their many eyes in rapid patterns, communicating something complex and emotional. And throughout Nexus Station, in every corridor and chamber and hidden corner, beings who had spent their lives in submission looked at each other with new expressions on their faces. Something had changed. Something had broken. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same again. The child was released that same day, and still recovering in the medical bay, formally his claim. The child ran into Ambassador's arms and did not let go for hours. But that was only the beginning of the changes. In the 3 days following the chase, Nexus Station transformed. The whispers that had spread among the prey species became open conversations. The archives that Elder and others had been studying became required reading for dozens of species. Everyone wanted to know more about the humans. And what they found changed everything. They had dismissed humanity's records as exaggeration. They had seen soft skin and no claws and assumed they understood everything they needed to know. They had been wrong. On the 4th day after the chase, the High Council requested a formal meeting with Ambassador. entered the council chamber alone. She walked with the same calm, steady pace she always used. Her expression was polite and patient. She showed no sign of triumph or pride. The High Speaker of the sat at the center of the curved table. He was ancient, his scales faded to silver with age. He had ruled the Concordat through dominance and fear for longer than some species had existed. He had watched 1,000 newcomers bow before his people's power. He studied the small human with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Al stood nearby, but she did not speak. Her scales were dull. She had not recovered from watching her brother's defeat. "Ambassador," the High Speaker said, his voice was deep and slow, "we have asked you here because we have questions, questions that have troubled us since the event in the—" "I'm happy to answer what I can," said. The High Speaker was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured to a screen on the wall. Images appeared, data files, records from humanity's archives. "We have reviewed your species' full history," he said. "The records we dismissed when you first applied to the Concordat, the files we considered unimportant." He paused. "We were wrong to dismiss them." The screen showed images of human history. Soldiers marching through snow with frozen feet, refusing to stop. Explorers crossing deserts with no water, refusing to stop. Prisoners escaping from captivity dozens of times across years, refusing to stop. Athletes running races of 100 miles, their bodies breaking down, refusing to stop. "We found records of your ancestors," the High Speaker continued. "Humans who survived falls from great heights, who shattered bones and kept fighting. Humans who were lost at sea for months and somehow lived. Humans who walked out of frozen wastelands when all logic said they should have died in the first day." More images, more data. The screen showed the migration patterns of early humans, small groups walking out of Africa, spreading across the entire planet, crossing mountains and deserts and frozen lands, reaching every corner of their world on foot. "We found records of your wars," the High Speaker said. "Not just the weapons you built, but the endurance you showed. Soldiers who marched for days without sleep. Fighters who continued long after their bodies should have failed. Humans who were defeated again and again but kept returning, kept fighting, kept refusing to accept that they had lost." Listened quietly. The High Speaker leaned forward. "You are not prey," he said slowly. "You never were. You are something we have not encountered before in all our 10,000 years. A predator that does not rely on strength or speed or venom or natural weapons." He paused. "A predator that simply does not stop." The chamber was silent. Al finally spoke. Her voice was subdued, almost confused. "Why did you not defend yourself when I mocked you, when I tried to humiliate you? You knew what you were, you could have told us, you could have shown us." Looked at her. For a moment, her calm expression softened into something almost like sympathy. "We have learned something over our long history," said. "The loudest threats usually come from those who are most afraid of a real fight. Those who have real power do not need to display it constantly. They do not need to prove anything." She shrugged. "I knew what I was. I was simply waiting for you to figure it out." The High Speaker made a sound that might have been a laugh. "And you knew we would, eventually." "I was patient," said simply. "Humans are good at being patient." The old studied her for a long time. Then he did something that made every other in the chamber freeze in shock. He bowed his head to her. "The Concordat would like to offer humanity a seat on the High Council," he said. "Not as newcomers, not as subordinates, as equals." Nodded slowly. "I will need to consult with my government, but I believe we can accept those terms." The meeting ended shortly after. But as walked out of the council chamber, she found something unexpected waiting for her in the corridor. A crowd. Hundreds of aliens filled the hallway. They were there, their many eyes blinking in complex patterns of emotion. They stood with them, the young child from the cage holding Ambassador's hand. Dozens of other species, the small ones, the soft ones, the ones who had lived in fear for so long, all of them watching the human ambassador with expressions of wonder. Elder pushed to the front of the crowd. His old eyes met. "We have been talking," he said, "all of us, the species that they have dominated, the ones who learned to bow and stay quiet and accept our place." He paused. "We do not want to live that way anymore." Looked out at the crowd. She saw fear in their eyes, fear of change, fear of what might happen next, but she also saw hope, real hope, perhaps for the first time in generations. "What do you want?" she asked. "We want to learn," said. "To learn what you know, how to endure, how to persist, how to refuse to give up even when everything seems impossible." His voice grew stronger. "The ruled through fear of their strength, but you have shown us that strength is not the only power. Patience is power. Endurance is power. The refusal to stop no matter what, that is power too." Was quiet for a long moment. "It won't be easy," she finally said. "Change never is. They will push back. They will try to return to the old ways. And endurance," she paused. "Endurance means being willing to keep going when every part of you wants to quit, when the goal seems impossible, when the pain seems too great. It means getting up every time you fall down." "We understand," said. The young child was still holding her hand, watching with those large, dark eyes. "We have fallen down many times, but for the first time we believe we might be able to get up." Looked at the child, at all the watching faces, at the hope that burned in eyes that had known only fear for so long. She thought of her ancestors, the ones who had walked out of Africa with nothing but their legs and their determination, the ones who had crossed mountains and deserts and frozen wastelands, the ones who had looked at impossible distances and simply started walking. She thought of what her grandmother used to say: "The race is not always to the swift. Sometimes it is to those who keep running." "Then let's get started," said. She began to walk down the corridor and the crowd parted before her, but this time they did not stay behind. One by one they fell into step with her. The dozens of other species who had spent so long hiding in the shadows. They walked together through Nexus Station, and somewhere behind them, watching from the council chamber, the High Speaker stood at his window and observed the procession with ancient, thoughtful eyes. The galaxy was changing. The old order was beginning to crack. And at the front of it all walked a small, soft, clawless human who had shown the apex predators what real power looked like. Not fangs, not claws, not speed or strength or venom. Just patience, endurance, and the absolute, unwavering certainty that no matter how far you run, no matter how long you hide, the human will still be coming. Forever. Until the end.